March 9th, 1945. Mariana Islands, Pacific Ocean. As the sun began its descent over the American airfields on Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, crews moved with precise urgency along runways carved from captured Japanese territory. On this evening, 325 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses stood ready, each undergoing final inspections before embarking on what would become the most transformative air raid of the Pacific War. Major General Curtis LeMay, commanding the 21st Bomber Command, had authorized a dramatic shift in tactics. These bombers would carry maximum incendiary payloads, rather than relying on precision bombing alone. Inside each aircraft's bomb bay, crews loaded clusters containing 1,520 M69 incendiary bomblets, each designed to ignite napalm at temperatures approaching 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The target was the densely packed Shitamachi district of Tokyo, home to roughly 750,000 residents crammed into wooden structures across just 12 square miles. At precisely 17:35, the first silver B-29 lifted from Guam's North Field. One by one, the aircraft descended into the twilight, their Wright R-3350 engines roaring as they climbed. Most flew independently rather than in formation, stripped of many defensive guns to accommodate double their standard incendiary load. Pathfinder aircraft led the assault, dropping blazing markers to guide the main force toward the target. Following closely, the primary strike units descended to altitudes between 5,000 and 7,000 feet, far below their typical operational ceiling, delivering firepower directly onto the city below. The B-29 Superfortress had entered the Pacific as the most advanced bomber of the war. Its development demanded over 1.44 million engineering man-hours and a total investment of $3 billion, surpassing even the Manhattan Project's $1.9 billion cost. The aircraft featured pressurized crew compartments, remote-controlled defensive gun turrets, and the most powerful piston engines ever installed on a single airframe. Production was spread across multiple sites: Boeing in Seattle, Renton, and Wichita, Glenn L. Martin Company in Omaha, and Bell Aircraft in Marietta, Georgia. Each B-29 measured 99 feet in length with a wingspan of 141 feet and was powered by 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines producing 2,200 horsepower apiece. Fully loaded, the aircraft could carry up to 20,000 pounds of ordnance over a combat radius of 1,600 miles, cruising at altitudes approaching 32,000 feet, with a maximum speed of 357 miles per hour. By March 1945, roughly 2,000 B-29s had been delivered to operational units, with production accelerating toward a wartime total of nearly 4,000 aircraft. At Boeing's Wichita facility alone, the assembly lines were producing more than 4 Superfortresses per working day, a testament to the industrial power and logistical coordination that underpinned America's strategic bombing campaign. By early 1945, the 20th Air Force, under the personal command of General Henry Hap Arnold, had fully established its strategic bombing capabilities in the Pacific. Initially, B-29 Superfortresses had flown from bases in China, beginning in June 1944, but the capture of the Mariana Islands allowed a more sustainable and concentrated approach. Beginning on November 17, 1944, the newly secured airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam became the operational hub for long-range strategic raids against the Japanese homelands. The 21st Bomber Command oversaw 3 primary bombardment wings from these bases: the 73rd and 313th on Saipan and the 314th on Guam. Collectively, these formations could assemble over 300 B-29s for a single sortie, each maintained by specialized crews working in continuous shifts to ensure operational readiness. Japanese air defenses, by contrast, were fragmented and technologically outmatched. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy operated distinct command chains, rarely coordinating, and communication between services was minimal. Their primary night interception aircraft, the Nakajima G1N1 Gecko, or Moonlight, had been rapidly adapted from a reconnaissance platform into a bomber killer. Equipped with twin 20mm Type 99 cannons angled upward at 30 degrees and an additional pair firing downward, the aircraft could theoretically engage bombers from unconventional angles. Yet production had been limited. Only 479 Geckos were built throughout the war, many of which had already been lost in prior engagements. Another option, the Kawasaki K-45 Tiru, or NIK, carried a 37mm cannon in its nose and oblique 20mm guns, but production had yielded merely 1,711 units since 1941. Lacking radar-directed interception capability, these aircraft relied entirely on searchlights and visual spotting, a nearly impossible task for fast-moving, high-altitude B-29s at night.
Ground defenses were similarly insufficient. Tokyo itself possessed fewer than 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns to cover the entire metropolitan area. High-altitude defense rested on Type 98 88mm guns, while Type 98 20mm cannons provided close-range protection, effective only up to 11,500 feet. Critically, none of these batteries were integrated with fire control radar, leaving gunners dependent on optical rangefinders and acoustic locators, tools rendered nearly useless after sunset or in poor weather. The numerical imbalance was staggering. While the American bomber fleet could dispatch hundreds of B-29s from the Marianas for a single mission, Japan could field perhaps 200 operational night fighters across the entire home islands by March 1945. Even when combined with ground-based anti-aircraft fire, the Japanese defensive network was ill-prepared to challenge the unprecedented scale, altitude, and speed of American strategic bombing. The disparity in technology, coordination, and resources underscored Japan's growing vulnerability to sustained aerial assault. By early 1945, Japan faced severe shortages of aviation fuel, sharply limiting pilot training and leaving new aviators with virtually no experience in night operations. Many aircraft remained grounded for extended periods, reserved solely for defensive sorties in anticipation of a potential American invasion. Against this backdrop, Major General Curtis LeMay assumed command of the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945, inheriting a campaign that had so far produced inconclusive results. High-altitude precision bombing from 30,000 feet had repeatedly failed. The jet stream, often exceeding 200 miles per hour, swept bombs far from their intended targets, while mechanical stress from climbing with maximum bomb loads frequently caused engine and airframe components, particularly those made of magnesium alloys, to overheat and fail. Cloud cover concealed targets more than two-thirds of the time, forcing reliance on rudimentary radar that often delivered inaccurate readings. After carefully reviewing these operational constraints, LeMay implemented a radical overhaul of bombing tactics, one that would redefine the aerial campaign against Japan. He directed that virtually all defensive armaments be removed from the B-29s, leaving only tail guns intact. This modification allowed each bomber to carry up to 7 tons of incendiary munitions, double the normal load of high explosives. Rather than flying at extreme altitudes, crews were instructed to descend to between 5,000 and 9,000 feet. This lower approach avoided destructive high-altitude winds, reduced stress on engines, and significantly increased bombing accuracy. Night missions further minimized exposure to Japanese fighters, which lacked both radar and trained night interception pilots. Navigation would be conducted individually using LORAN radio signals, with aircraft arriving in a steady stream over several hours rather than in large, easily targeted formations. Weather forecasts predicted near-ideal conditions for the nights of March 9th and 10th. Clear skies with brisk surface winds that would carry flames throughout the designated target areas. The choice of target underscored the strategic intent of the operation. American planners aimed not merely at military installations, but at Tokyo's industrial backbone hidden within dense residential neighborhoods. Small workshops producing aircraft components, electrical devices, and precision instruments were interwoven with the urban fabric, often sharing space with homes in narrow alleyways. Intelligence analysts relied on pre-war Japanese urban planning maps and Office of Strategic Services reconnaissance data to rank wards by their industrial density. The northeastern districts of Tokyo, Asakusa, Honjo, and Fukugawa, were selected for their extraordinarily high population density and the prevalence of tightly packed wooden dwellings inhabited by multi-generational families. Central to the raid's destructive potential was the M69 incendiary bomblet. This advanced munition consisted of a hexagonal steel casing measuring roughly 3 inches in diameter and 20 inches in length, weighing 6 pounds. Each unit contained a thermite-based composition capable of igniting and sustaining fires at extremely high temperatures, designed to overwhelm the flammable urban landscape of Tokyo. Combined with LeMay's new tactics, these weapons transformed the B-29s into instruments of unprecedented destructive power, capable of striking with precision while exploiting the vulnerabilities of a crowded and combustible city. The M69 incendiary bomblet represented a significant advance over earlier thermite and magnesium devices, which, while extremely hot, could be extinguished relatively easily. This new weapon relied on a thickened napalm gel developed jointly by Standard Oil engineers and Harvard University chemists. Bombs were carried in E-46 cluster units, each containing 38 individual M69 bomblets that separated automatically at approximately 2,000 feet above the target. Each bomblet deployed a small cotton streamer to orient the fuse downward, ensuring proper detonation on impact. Upon hitting a surface, a short time delay fuse burned for 3 to 5 seconds before igniting a white phosphorus charge. The explosion dispersed flaming napalm up to 100 feet in multiple directions, maximizing the fire's spread through buildings. The delayed fuse design meant that each bomblet would land on its side, allowing the incendiary material to penetrate wooden structures before igniting. Extensive testing at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah had confirmed the M69's effectiveness against full-scale replicas of Japanese residential districts, showing how the weapon could create numerous simultaneous ignition points across a densely built area. Each B-29 could carry 40 clusters, totaling 1,520 individual incendiary bomblets per aircraft. Of the 325 bombers launched on the mission, 279 successfully reached Tokyo. Operation Meetinghouse, as the raid was later named, ultimately dropped roughly 424,000 incendiary bomblets across the city, producing a density of firepower never before attempted. Planners had calculated that the concentration of fires would quickly merge, generating intense wind currents that would drive flames into previously untouched areas, creating a self-sustaining conflagration. The first B-29 departed Guam just after 5:30 p.m. on March 9th, piloted by Brigadier General Thomas Sarsfield Power, commanding the 314th Bombardment Wing. Throughout the evening, bombers lifted off at 50-second intervals from 3 separate bases, embarking on a 14-hour round trip that would test both crew endurance and aircraft reliability. The crews wore lighter flight gear rather than full suits, taking advantage of the lower altitude and warmer conditions. With defensive armaments removed to reduce weight, the aircraft climbed efficiently, conserving fuel for the journey of approximately 1,500 miles. Mount Fuji, snow-capped and visible in the distance, served as a key navigation reference point as the bombers approached the Japanese coast. Air raid sirens sounded across Tokyo near 10:30 p.m., yet the majority of residents initially stayed indoors. Previous high-altitude bombing raids had caused limited damage, fostering a false sense of security. Civil defense measures proved wholly inadequate for the scale of the attack. Only 18 reinforced concrete shelters were available, providing refuge for roughly 90,000 people out of the city's 4.3 million inhabitants. Most families relied on shallow earthen dugouts called bugos, which offered minimal protection against incendiary bombs. The city's approximately 8,000 firefighters were equipped largely with hand pumps and bucket brigades intended for routine fires rather than large-scale aerial attacks. Volunteer firefighting units, organized by neighborhood associations, consisted mainly of elderly residents, women, and teenagers, armed only with sand, water, and basic tools. The defenses were unprepared to contend with a concentrated assault using thousands of incendiary devices designed to ignite simultaneously across a sprawling urban landscape. In the early hours of March 10, 1945, the first Pathfinder B-29 Superfortresses reached Tokyo at 12:08 a.m., approaching from multiple directions to delineate the target area. Operating at a relatively low altitude of 5,000 feet, these aircraft deployed M47 napalm bombs that ignited immediately upon impact, producing bright, visible markers that formed a vast flaming X across the cityscape. Minutes later, the main body of bombers arrived, aiming for the illuminated zone. Weather conditions were optimal for the raid. Clear skies allowed visibility for accurate targeting, while surface winds ranged between 17 and 28 miles per hour, with occasional gusts approaching 45 miles per hour, conditions that would intensify the spread of fire. As the M69 cluster bombs separated in midair and began their descent, witnesses described them as shining metallic streaks against the glow of the fires below. Upon impact, thousands of individual incendiary devices ignited simultaneously, producing a rapid succession of flames that engulfed entire neighborhoods. The strong winds carried the fires from building to building, merging smaller blazes into a single, massive conflagration. Ground temperatures soared above 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to melt glass and warp metal structures. The heat generated violent updrafts, producing tornado-like wind vortices that lifted debris into the air, turning streets into hazardous maelstroms of flames, collapsing buildings and impassable terrain. Smoke and intense heat reduced visibility to mere feet, while the roar of the fires drowned all other sounds. Among those caught in the inferno was 24-year-old Yoshiko Hashimoto, living in the Sumida district with her 13-month-old infant. Her husband, serving as an army officer, was stationed elsewhere in the city. Recounting the events later for historical records, Yoshiko described the attack. "The bombs fell like torrential rain. I had never witnessed anything of such magnitude. The streets were alive with panic, and the air itself burned with heat." She, along with her parents, baby, and sisters, fled through narrow alleys teeming with thousands of escaping residents. Chaos quickly engulfed the district. Families became separated, elderly and infirm were unable to continue, and the sheer density of fleeing people created deadly bottlenecks. Firefighting brigades, armed only with rudimentary pumps and hand tools, were forced to abandon their efforts as heat and flames rendered direct intervention impossible. At the Sumida River, Yoshiko faced a scene of total devastation. Burning timber, signage, household items, and fragments of buildings swept through the air, carried by the powerful firestorm winds. Entire warehouses along the riverbanks were engulfed in flame. Her father pushed her and the infant into the river, actions that ultimately saved their lives, but her mother, father, and sister were killed in the chaos. Across the target zone, similar tragedies unfolded repeatedly. Many attempting to escape into rivers or canals were confronted with scalding waters, while others were crushed in the human stampede. The conflagration's winds proved lethal in themselves, capable of moving people great distances from their original locations, scattering survivors amid the devastation. By the time the raid concluded, Tokyo had been transformed into a vast, fiery wasteland. The precision and intensity of the B-29 attack, combined with favorable weather conditions, the incendiary power of the M69 bomblets, and the city's inadequate civil defenses, ensured that the destruction was both immediate and nearly total. The events of this night marked the beginning of a campaign that would demonstrate the unprecedented destructive potential of strategic incendiary bombing. During the March 10th attack, critical infrastructure across Tokyo, including police stations, hospitals, and designated evacuation sites, became engulfed by the spreading inferno. At Kikukawa Elementary School, one such designated shelter, post-raid investigations found only twisted metal and charred remains where hundreds had sought refuge. Centuries-old Buddhist temples, historically considered safe havens, were also reduced to ashes along with those sheltering inside. The extreme intensity of the fires meant that even individuals inside traditional shelters faced life-threatening heat and smoke inhalation. Superheated air inflicted serious respiratory damage on anyone exposed, even for brief periods. Estimates of casualties varied, reflecting the chaos and scale of destruction. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey calculated 87,793 fatalities and 40,918 injuries, while the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department reported 83,793 deaths with 40,918 wounded. The Tokyo Fire Department produced higher figures, estimating 97,000 dead and 125,000 injured. Historical analysis now suggests that total fatalities exceeded 100,000, surpassing the immediate human toll of either atomic bomb. Structural losses were staggering. 267,171 buildings were destroyed across 15.8 square miles, erasing roughly 1/4 of Tokyo's urban landscape. More than 1 million residents were rendered homeless, and the destruction of workshops embedded in residential neighborhoods crippled local manufacturing, directly affecting production of essential war materials. Thousands of skilled workers were killed, displaced, or forced to abandon the city entirely. American losses were comparatively minor. 14 B-29s failed to return from the operation, with 96 airmen killed or missing. Many of these aircraft encountered extreme turbulence caused by the superheated updrafts rising from the firestorm, which sometimes led to loss of control. Others suffered anti-aircraft fire during their low-altitude bombing runs, although Japanese gunners struggled to track aircraft operating far below the expected altitude range. Crew members reported seeing the firestorm smoke even from operational altitudes, a striking reminder of the raid's scale. Those who had questioned Major General Curtis LeMay's unconventional tactics were quickly sobered by the operation's effectiveness and destructive power. Reflecting afterward, LeMay acknowledged the ethical weight of the mission, noting, "Had we lost the war, I could have been judged a war criminal." Yet the strategic significance of the operation was undeniable, earning congratulations from General Henry H. Arnold, who remarked that LeMay's crews had the courage for anything. The raid immediately influenced subsequent U.S. strategy. Within 10 days, similar incendiary attacks struck Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, bringing devastation to Japan's 4 largest cities. The campaign only paused when the 21st Bomber Command exhausted its stock of M69 incendiary bombs, prompting accelerated production in American factories. The contrast between American and Japanese capabilities had never been more pronounced. The United States could replace lost B-29s in a matter of weeks, while Japan lacked the resources to rebuild destroyed urban areas or compensate for the loss of skilled labor. American industrial output outpaced Japan's by a factor of 10. Each American weapon combined technical sophistication with logistical abundance, while Japan struggled even to maintain basic ammunition. By mid-1945, the U.S. produced 50,000 tons of incendiary bombs per month, a scale Japan could not approach. The meticulous planning behind the raids reflected a scientific approach to warfare. The Chemical Warfare Service constructed full-scale replicas of Tokyo neighborhoods at Dugway Proving Ground using pre-war architectural blueprints to study fire propagation. Standard Oil developed the specialized napalm mixture, while Harvard University and the University of Chicago contributed research analyzing wind, fuel load, and combustion patterns. The integration of rigorous scientific study with operational planning contrasted sharply with Japanese military doctrine, which emphasized honor, tradition, and personal valor over material and technological considerations. The inability of Japanese forces to develop effective countermeasures revealed the strategic and industrial limitations that modern warfare imposed, underscoring the decisive role of technology, logistics, and planning in the outcome of the conflict. Despite the preliminary raid on February 25th that destroyed roughly 28,000 structures in Tokyo, local authorities implemented few meaningful improvements to urban fire defenses. Proposed measures, such as creating fire breaks by demolishing selected buildings, were largely ignored, and evacuation procedures remained theoretical rather than operational. Military leadership consistently directed civilians to remain in place even while intelligence reports indicated that large-scale incendiary attacks were imminent. This failure stemmed from inadequate coordination between the Imperial Army and Navy, as well as restrictive command hierarchies that limited decisive action. Japanese night fighter units illustrated the widening technological gap between the two nations. Pilots like Lieutenant Sachio Endo achieved notable successes, intercepting 8 B-29 bombers during the campaign, but such accomplishments were exceptional. The vast majority of night fighter crews struggled to locate their targets once darkness combined with smoke from previous fires reduced visibility. Lacking airborne radar, pilots depended on ground-based acoustic and visual detection, techniques that quickly became ineffective as the infernos intensified. Even when engagements occurred, the standard 20mm cannons were often insufficient to penetrate the heavily reinforced B-29s unless the gunner struck vital components, such as engines or fuel tanks. Some aviators resorted to extreme measures, deliberately ramming enemy bombers in suicidal attempts to inflict damage. Tokyo's firefighting capabilities highlighted systemic limitations. The city operated only 386 fire engines, primarily manual pump units requiring multiple operators. Water pressure was inconsistent and insufficient to combat large-scale fires, and the damage to water mains further reduced effectiveness. Firefighting doctrine emphasized defending individual buildings through conventional methods, but this approach proved incapable of addressing the simultaneous ignition of thousands of structures. When the conflagration erupted, most fire brigades were quickly overwhelmed. Equipment failed, personnel were forced to retreat, and vast portions of the city burned unchecked.
The psychological consequences for survivors were immediate and profound. Residents who had relied on shelters and municipal defense systems felt betrayed by their inadequacy. Refugees fleeing Tokyo spread accounts of the destruction throughout Japan, challenging official narratives about the war's progress. Confidence in remaining industrial operations and local governance plummeted, and workforce attendance at factories fell sharply. The concept of the routine air raid entered common discourse, reflecting the normalization of widespread urban destruction. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities had endured major incendiary attacks, leaving much of the urban landscape heavily damaged even before the atomic bombings. The outcomes of these operations informed American military planning for the anticipated invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall. Strategic analysts projected that continued incendiary bombardments would eliminate the nation's remaining industrial output by October 1945. Major General Curtis LeMay believed that sustained air attacks might compel Japan's surrender without the need for a costly amphibious invasion. Estimates from the Joint Chiefs of Staff suggested that conventional bombing had already caused nearly 900,000 civilian casualties and could inflict millions more if hostilities continued. These calculations shaped President Truman's approach to atomic weapon deployment, not merely as a supplement to conventional bombing, but as a tool capable of achieving psychological shock on an unprecedented scale. The human toll transcended national boundaries. American air crews carried the weight of these operations for decades, reflecting on the destruction they had wrought despite the context of wartime duty. Richard Bale of the 9th Bombardment Group recalled the intense visual impact of the fires from his cockpit, an image that remained with him throughout his life. Japanese survivors endured long-lasting physical and psychological trauma, and families on both sides experienced irreversible losses that resonated across multiple generations. The incendiary raids, while demonstrating the power of modern strategic bombing, left a legacy defined as much by human suffering as by military effectiveness.
The firebombing raid of March 9th to 10th, 1945, produced catastrophic human and social consequences. Thousands of civilians were left bereft, creating an immense population of widows, orphans, and displaced families that overwhelmed the limited social support structures available in Tokyo. When morning arrived, the city's eastern districts had been transformed into a wasteland. Streets and neighborhoods that had once been vibrant were now reduced to ash and rubble, with only the strongest brick or concrete buildings remaining intact. Survivors wandered through unrecognizable terrain, searching for landmarks and homes that had been erased, while recovery teams struggled to clear debris using heavy machinery. Identification of victims proved impossible in many cases, and mass funerals were conducted for weeks in an effort to provide some semblance of closure. Canals, rivers, and drainage channels remained clogged with wreckage, further complicating relief and rescue efforts. The industrial disruption was profound. Eastern Tokyo had been home to countless small family-run workshops producing essential components for larger factories, including precision instruments, electrical parts, and mechanical fittings. The destruction of these facilities disrupted critical supply chains and caused long-term setbacks for Japan's manufacturing output. Equally damaging was the loss of skilled artisans, machinists, and technical specialists, workers whose training required years to acquire and whose absence could not be replaced quickly. Productivity in surviving factories fell sharply as workers grappled with housing loss, personal trauma, and the collapse of local support networks. Following the replenishment of incendiary stockpiles, the air campaign resumed in May 1945, adopting refined techniques that increased operational efficiency. By July, B-29 crews were also distributing propaganda leaflets ahead of attacks, warning civilians of forthcoming raids and reinforcing the psychological dimension of total air superiority. These missions increasingly encountered minimal resistance, as Japanese defensive capacity eroded as experienced fighter pilots were lost, anti-aircraft ammunition dwindled, and civil defense structures disintegrated under sustained pressure.
The legality and ethics of the operation remain subjects of historical debate. International conventions, including the 1907 Hague Regulations, addressed the bombardment of undefended cities, but ambiguities persisted regarding what constituted defended or military targets. Post-war tribunals prosecuted certain Japanese leaders for targeting civilians, but did not evaluate Allied operations with equal scrutiny. Nevertheless, the precedent set by these attacks influenced the evolution of international humanitarian law, underscoring the tension between military necessity and civilian protection even as precision weaponry advanced. Meteorological conditions played a critical role in amplifying the raid's effects. Planners intentionally timed the attack to coincide with strong winds following an extended dry period. American meteorologists had studied Japanese weather patterns meticulously, identifying conditions that would maximize fire spread. On the night of the operation, wind speeds ranged from 17 to 45 miles per hour, depending on location, exceeding some forecasts and creating conditions that enhanced the conflagration's intensity. From the perspective of individual B-29 crews, the mission exceeded expectations in both scale and psychological impact. Many airmen were struck by the sheer magnitude of destruction below, noting dense smoke plumes and severe atmospheric turbulence even at operational altitude. Pilots contended with sudden updrafts and thermal instability while maintaining formation and completing bombing runs. The experience left some crew members requesting reassignment, struggling to reconcile their roles with personal moral considerations, while others remained focused on the strategic objective of ending the conflict swiftly. Japanese military response demonstrated critical command and control deficiencies. Anti-aircraft batteries fired continuously but achieved limited effect in darkness and through dense smoke. Fighter squadrons launched approximately 90 sorties but managed only sporadic, largely ineffective interceptions. Civil defense units were similarly constrained. Fire department leadership received insufficient warning about the scale of the raid, and resources were disproportionately allocated to protect government and military facilities. Infrastructure destruction severed communications, leaving messengers unable to traverse affected areas and coordination virtually impossible. In the post-war era, memorialization of Tokyo's firebombing has reflected evolving historical perspectives. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which became symbols of international attention, the March 1945 raids on Tokyo remained less widely recognized outside Japan. Survivors, however, tirelessly advocated for decades to preserve and document their experiences, emphasizing the profound human cost alongside the military and strategic outcomes. The firebombing of Tokyo thus remains a powerful case study in the interplay of technology, strategy, environmental conditions, and the human consequences of total war. Katsumoto Saotoi, a survivor of the Tokyo firebombing, established a research center dedicated to documenting the raids and the resulting destruction, ensuring that first-hand accounts and personal experiences were preserved for posterity. His work highlighted the complex challenge of commemorating civilian suffering while situating it within the broader historical and military context of the war. Today, military scholars continue to study Operation Meetinghouse to understand both the potential and the limits of strategic air power. Recognizing that the raid demonstrated technical superiority could overcome geographical constraints, but that urban destruction alone was insufficient to force immediate capitulation. Japan continued its resistance for nearly 5 months after the attack, illustrating that even overwhelming material and technological advantage cannot instantly compel surrender in a determined adversary.
The operation also exposed the profound difficulty in distinguishing between military and civilian targets in modern warfare. The transition from early precision strikes to area bombing reflected operational pragmatism rather than formal policy. Initial efforts by the 21st Bomber Command followed traditional high-altitude precision doctrine, but persistent ineffectiveness led Major General Curtis LeMay to implement low-altitude incendiary attacks across dense urban zones. By March 1945, targeting decisions prioritized population density and the location of small industrial workshops embedded within residential neighborhoods rather than focusing solely on conventional military infrastructure. Personal testimonies from survivors revealed the enduring psychological and social consequences of the raid. Many experienced trauma that persisted for decades, with children separated from families often never learning the fates of their parents or siblings. Yoshiko Hashimoto, who survived with her infant while losing close family members, recounted decades later, "The memory of that night never leaves me. My mother, father, and sister died, while my baby and I survived. I think about them every day." The social fabric of working-class Tokyo was irrevocably altered. Extended families were dispersed, long-standing businesses were destroyed, and community networks that had existed for generations vanished almost instantly. From a strategic standpoint, Operation Meetinghouse accelerated Japan's military collapse. While historians continue to debate whether conventional bombing alone could have compelled surrender, the systematic devastation of Tokyo's urban and industrial centers created conditions in which sustained resistance became increasingly untenable. Emperor Hirohito later referenced the bombing campaigns and the dire domestic situation as factors influencing the decision to surrender. The approximately 100,000 deaths in Tokyo, while tragic, contributed to ending a war that could have otherwise required an invasion and resulted in millions of additional casualties. The raid illustrates the evolution of modern warfare, from limited battlefield-focused engagements to conflicts encompassing entire societies, where civilian populations are directly affected by industrially produced weapons deployed over urban areas. The technological disparity between the American B-29s carrying highly sophisticated incendiary devices and Japanese defenders equipped with rudimentary firefighting tools exemplifies the decisive influence of industrial and technical capacity. Yet the historical record also reflects irony. Despite its staggering immediate toll,
Operation Meetinghouse was largely overshadowed in public consciousness by the atomic bombings that followed 5 months later. This relative obscurity allowed conventional area effect weapons, including incendiaries, to continue development and deployment in subsequent conflicts without the same degree of scrutiny associated with nuclear weapons. Statistical summaries only hint at the human dimension. Of the 325 B-29s that took off, 279 reached the target, delivering approximately 1,665 tons of incendiaries across 15.8 square miles. Some 267,171 structures were destroyed, resulting in roughly 100,000 fatalities and over 1 million people displaced. Behind these figures were countless individual experiences: American aircrew executing orders under extreme operational stress, Japanese families forced to flee their homes, children separated from parents, and survivors grappling with profound losses. Operation Meetinghouse remains the most destructive air raid in history, not merely as a measure of military success, but as a sobering testament to the scale of destruction modern warfare can inflict, where strategic objectives can justify extensive civilian impact and entire urban populations can be transformed into instruments and victims of industrial-scale conflict.